We are honestly blessed to have Shirley. She's speaking, which is why she's here. And Ali Bestucky, you ever heard that name? Ali Bestucky. So she's one of the speakers there, and she speaks all over. And God has used her, I would say, passion for understanding the truth, the ability to articulate it well, and make it understandable to relate to a lot of people. She's written, and she'll talk about several books. The one that I think you probably may be most familiar with is the Mama Bear Apologetics. And that has been one of those that has been, I would say, widely read. I mean, we had, like, my sister-in-law in Midland had read the book. And so, obviously, it's like, wow, okay, this has gone out. And I think this content, which is why we teach overall view, is so important. If you can think and understand the ideas from a Christian perspective, then you see the fallacies, you see the inconsistencies. And Hillary does that extremely well. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome her so much.
Well, it's great to be here. Did I hear that there's a couple of Iowans here? Where are you from? Boone. Anyone else? Where? Stratford. I kind of know Boone. Anyway, my husband and I moved from here out to Pella, so if y'all know where Pella is. So anyways, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my story, how I got into apologetics. First off, I realized this is the very beginning. Who can give me a really good definition of apologetics? Very good. Being able to defend your faith when confronted by unbelievers. Now, I'm gonna do something here that I'm gonna have everybody close your eyes. You're gonna vote anonymously, and you're gonna have two options. Do you think apologetics is primarily for unbelievers or believers? So close your eyes. Don't raise your hand if you think apologetics is primarily for believers. Okay, now raise your hand if you think it's primarily for unbelievers. Okay, we're close to half and half, not quite being the same. So I think it really depends on what the Lord has called you to. So there are some people who they truly are called to an unbelieving world. I would say I always referred to my husband as an atheist magnet. It didn't matter where we went. He would, like, we literally, I think we were at the Village Church in Dallas before. There was like a whole village-wide picnic. We're sitting there on our little picnic blanket. Some guy randomly just comes and sits down, and he's like the only agnostic for miles and wants to talk about the existence of God. Like, that is the person that will find my husband. There's actually a guy in the area. My husband used to do debates, and he went from being an atheist who was debating against John formally to then them having lunches and breakfast and stuff to where he went, okay, maybe I'm agnostic. And then after, a couple more years, okay, maybe I'm a deist, which means I believe in this idea of of God, but he doesn't interact with anyone, to a theist and eventually to a Christian. Just through having those long conversations through that relationship. I would say if you're called to unbelievers, apologetics will be a long road. It will be a road that is 99% relationship, and that 1% really knowing what you're talking about. But it's still important. I would say primarily, though, for the church, apologetics is for believers. And the reason why I say that is there are very few people who really, that will give you something to go look at. So the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy, whenever you see the statement of, so we have like the National Statement on Sexuality. We have the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy. What that is a lot of times evangelical leaders who all get together and they discuss one particular topic that Christianity as a whole has just kind of been, battling about. Think of these like your early councils. You had your Council of Nicaea, you had your Council of Trent, all these different times where they had different things like, okay, was Jesus God or was he man or was he both? Or trying to decide the different roles within the Trinity. You'll have different councils that come together and say, this is what we can understand based on the teaching, and this is what we as Christianity, this is what we follow. So the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy recognizes the fact that, number one, we don't have the autographs from 2,000 years ago. An autograph means it's the original writing. And the reason why we don't have the original writing is because whenever it started to get degraded to the point where it was difficult to read, they would have scribes that faithfully transmitted it, and then they would destroy the original so that no one could accidentally misread. And at the same time, it's probably good that we don't have that, because Think about the 10 Commandments. One of the things is do not bow down to any other idol. Can you imagine if we had the literal, original, handwritten by, Paul or John or whoever? Like, that would be up in a museum somewhere, and we'd see people going in worshiping it, would we not? Yeah. So God's like, yeah, let's not do that. But we recognize as Christians that there have been small changes, usually like scribal errors. Maybe someone spelled John with one N, someone else spelled it as two. But across the board, we can actually tell if something is a mistake, where it was changed, when it was changed, or if it was inserted, because we have so many documents from the early church. Because what happens is if you're having copies that are done and they go out to all these places, you can trace the expansion of these copies. So when it comes to Muslims, they'll say the Quran has never been changed, not once. You can actually go and show them their own scriptures. Nope, this has been changed. Christians, we believe in the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy, and we say that it is in its autographs, everything was absolutely exactly as Christ wanted. But there are little things, none of which really change the meaning of Scripture. Like I said, some of these like just little accidents or things that people can, tell the difference. One of the best things that we have for the Old Testament, does anyone know what the number one discovery in the 20th century was for the reliability of the Old Testament?
Dead Sea Scrolls.
That's right, the Dead Sea Scrolls. That they had a period of time where they were going and destroying all sorts of things. And so we had this group that said, we are going to hide these scrolls in these caves. And then sometime in the 40s or whatever, some shepherd, loses his goat and it goes in and he hears something crash and just comes across all of these scrolls. And they've compared them to the originals, and they are basically word for word what we have from the originals. The kind of consistency across Scripture is amazing. Anyway, so those are some of the things you might see. Mormons would say, we believe that Mormonism is true because I have the burning in the bosom. Islam says we believe our religion is true because can you compare anything to the Quran? Christianity has something that no other religion has, and that is testable claims. Testable claims. If you look at the origin of every world religion, what you are normally going to find is some dude somewhere off by himself, private revelation, that he then comes and tries to tell everybody, I just had this revealed to me, this is the right way. There is no way to test someone's private revelation. And so even though I think it's important for us to be able to give our testimony of this is how the Lord has come in and changed me, at the same time, we live in a time where you're not allowed to even challenge people's what it's called lived experiences. So this might be evidence of why Christianity is important to me, but it is probably never going to be evidence for someone else of why Christianity is true. There is a very big difference from this is true for me and this is true. Those are completely different statements. And we as Christians don't say this is true for me. We say Christianity is true because it has testable statements. And if we look at 1 Corinthians 15, I call it the I pity the fool passage, where Paul is basically talking about if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and we are to be pitied as fools. Basically, if Christianity is proven to not be true, people should feel sorry for us because we're so dumb. That is the kind of religion, that is the kind of faith that we are supposed to have. Now, being here in the West, we have largely gone uncontested for quite some time. And I would say even your generation is very different than the generation I grew up with. So I will say, for an example, the way culture reinforced Christianity when I was a kid, no school had any activities Wednesday nights. Can you tell me why? That was like Bible studies, small groups, Awana. Nowadays, you'll have soccer tournaments, all sorts of tournaments, both on Wednesdays and Sundays. Like there was nothing on Sundays and there was nothing on Wednesdays. Because culture, even the ones who did not believe in Christianity, knew that we will have enough kids that this is sacred time. We can't do that. That is not the case anymore. So while we may not necessarily have culture reinforcing our beliefs, what we have is something called a kind of soft totalitarianism that is starting to come in. So who can tell me like what maybe a hard totalitarianism might look like? Anybody just want to give it a shot? Very controlling. So a hard totalitarianism might be what we saw like in East and West Germany, what you usually see in communist countries, where you are not allowed to speak because you will get carted off by the police. You will get carted off by the state. We saw this. The number of people I have heard saying, well, he says that he hates gays and he thinks that trans are an abomination and he thinks that, just saying all sorts of nonsense. He thinks that the Civil Rights Act should have never happened. If they were to listen to Charlie Kirk's actual words, it would be very clear that was not what he was saying. But within soft totalitarianism, if you have enough people who refuse to listen to any other contrary evidence, and all they can do is they can sick the mob on you and say, this person is a racist. This person is a misogynist. This person is whatever they want to say. And we're going to go through kind of later on in this talk how to basically get away from that, because they're going to provide snippets, they're going to provide partial truths that will sound right. And then they will sick everybody on you. And so I don't know if y'all are old enough for this, but let's see, how old were you? This is 2025? Yeah, you would have been in your early teens. When the Black Lives Movement was really in its big, full-blown heyday, there was this video of these people that were just sitting and eating outside. They were just, having a burger outside, and they had this mob descend upon them saying, Black Lives Matter, and saying, you have to raise your fist in the air. And there was a woman saying, well, what do y'all stand for? Because she knew that the phrase Black Lives Matter was different from the organization Black Lives Matter. Does anyone know some of the more contestable things that the organization Black Lives Matter officially had on their website before it kind of got scrubbed? Can anyone tell me any of those? They had the destruction of the nuclear family, meaning we don't like the idea of there being a mother and a father and kids all living in the same. We want everybody to kind of raise kids as a village, because Marxism, communism, Karl Marx taught that living in a family unit taught you to have allegiances and loyalties to people other than the state. And it also taught you how to either to think of hierarchies as the default. In communism, Marxism does not like having hierarchies. That turns you into the oppressor versus the oppressed. So it had nothing to do with whether or not Black Lives mattered. It's like all the people who formed Black Lives Matter went on record saying, we are a group of trained Marxists. So when you had this mob descend on these poor people who were trying to have their fish and chips outside of Long John Silver's, saying, you basically raise your hand, are you for us or against us? And they attacked these people because they would not raise their fist, because you can see in the video, they're trying to ask questions. What do you stand for? What am I raising my fist for? That is soft totalitarianism. It's where you don't need the police to do anything for you, because people will police themselves. This is kind of what we're seeing ourselves in. And so knowing how to interact with other worldviews is really, really important right now. So one of the things that I was thinking about recently, because people talk about salt and light, how we are called to be salt and light. So someone give me some of the properties of salt and light that really translate over into the analogy of what we're supposed to be as Christians. What are some properties of salt and light? Okay, it adds flavor. That is one of the things. That's probably what we all think of when we first think of salt. Anybody else? It preserves the food. So I'm gonna give you an example. My mom's gonna be so proud. I remember being in the car with her and my dad a long time ago. It was back when we lived in I must have been like a sophomore in college. And we were actually having the debate about same-sex marriage. And I was saying, you know what? It's not like opposite-sex marriage. People have really done a great job with marriage to begin with. We kind of, marriage is in a pretty bad state already. So like, why wouldn't we just say, sure, you can't mess it up any more than we've already messed it up. And she said, because this is one of the things that will decay society, and we are called to prevent the decay. And that was one of the few times that I changed my mind on the spot on something when I realized, anything that's preventing decay in a society is something that we are called to do. Now, how we're called to do that might be different. That we are called to do it is assuredly what we are called to do. Okay, salt and light. Anyone else? It actually keeps the water from boiling over. So ironically enough, the water will actually get hotter, but it won't boil over. So if you sometimes have water that's wildly boiling over, you dump a bunch of salt in it and the water calms down. What would that look like for us in society? To be the salt in a boiling pot that is absolutely boiling over. It's not going to solve the problem. It's not going to take the temperature down. It might make it go up, but it will slow the chaos. And that is part of being salt and light. So my apologetics story was, I grew up in a Christian home. And in fact, this is one of the things, I just want to point this out. I wish that I had had someone like me giving their testimony to me when I was young. You know why? Because every single testimony I ever heard from, elementary on up was someone who had gone through all these gnarly things and done all these gnarly things. And then they discovered God. And now they were giving their testimony and saying how great Christianity was. And you know what my question was at that time? What happened to all the people that grew up in the church? Why aren't they here talking about how passionate they are about God and about Christ? What happened to them? How did their hearts die? Is that my fate? Is it my fate that I am excited about this now, but that's just going to kind of go away because I had never seen an example of someone who grew up in the faith that was then so excited that they even came back to tell their testimony. So I hated my testimony for a long time because I just thought it was boring, Grew up in the church, never really had a major time of walking away, and I'm still in the church. Yay, great testimony. That is actually a very rare testimony. And so I used to dislike it because I thought that it made me less interesting, but now I'm kind of like, I wish I'd had someone telling me that because I think it's rare. It's what we hope for you, because there are a lot of scars that I have friends who either came to Christ later or who walked away from the faith and came back that still bear a lot of the scars, a lot of the, coping mechanisms, habits that they develop that they have to fight that much more against. Cognitive distortions. Do people know what cognitive distortions are? We won't go into that. But all the things that they have to deal with on a psychological level now that they didn't have to deal with before. I want your story to be the one where you say, you know what, I grew up as a Christian. I eventually had to figure out why am I a Christian, and then I stayed a Christian. So one of the things I loved when we used to go to the village church was Celebration Sunday. So Celebration Sunday was two different things. It was baptizing the babies, and it was dedicating the babies, baby dedication and baptisms. And, we would always have some of the stories of someone who, was coming out of a, same-sex relationship or had been into drugs. And, we had all those stories. But a majority of the people who were getting baptized talked about how for their whole life they thought they were a Christian. And then how the Lord had to meet them in that safe place where they thought they were Christian to realize, oh, crap, I don't actually believe. And at that point, he got a hold of their heart and regenerated them, and they became a different person. But they were coming from the history of having thought they were Christian the whole time. And this is kind of one of the things that I think apologetics is important for, is it is really easy to evangelize people who have never heard. It is a lot harder to evangelize people who think that they have. And it's even harder to evangelize people who have heard wrongly, to then try to correct the mistakes. And it's probably the hardest to evangelize people who think they know the truth and think they are in Christ when they're not. You actually will get harder and harder territory as you go up through this familiarity with Scripture. And that, what I would say, is kind of what we right now are having to deal with, is a lot of people who think they know. I would say that the theological concepts that we used to take for granted, we can't take for granted anymore. So Barna, in association with Arizona Christian University, did a study to see how many people, self-proclaimed Christians, actually had a biblical worldview. So, how many self-proclaimed Christians actually have a biblical worldview? Raise your hand if you think it's more than 50. Or I'll say less than 50. Okay, more than 50, now less than 50. Less than 40. Keep them up high, you're like all doing this. Yeah, there you go. Less than 30, less than 20, less than 10, less than 5, less than 2. Nice. It's actually 4%. 4% think that they know. And in fact, they even looked at the pastors. I think the ones that had the highest biblical worldview would be the head pastors. The lowest was the executive pastors. But you know what the youth pastors were hovering around? I think it was like around, now I'm drawing a blank. It was either 16 or 26%. And that's the pastors. So this is why I do what I do in terms of Mama Bear Apologetics, is the idea that we can send our kids out to the church and think that they're going to be getting a biblical worldview. That is not the case. So I grew up in a Christian home. I always believed I kind of wanted to be a missionary. I loved Jesus. It wasn't until I was about 12 that my pastor went through an apologetics series. I'd never heard the word apologetics, and I'd never heard anyone preach from the pulpit about anything but just what the Bible said. I was lucky that the pastor I grew up under had a similar story to, we'll say, C.S. Lewis and Lee Strobel, that he was... So he became a Christian by saying this, he was an atheist, and he said, this Christianity thing is dumb. I need to just be able to shut these people up once and for all. And so he went through and started studying and then found out, oh, wow, this is actually true. So when he preached, he didn't preach just from the perspective of someone who'd studied the Bible. He preached from the perspective of someone who'd studied the Bible and questioned the Bible. And here's all the questions that I have, and I'm going to answer them also in the sermon. So I didn't know that I was getting that kind of training, but I was. But he did 3 different series. He did a series on the liar, Lord, lunatic. Raise your hand high with who's familiar with the liar, Lord, lunatic. It's called the trilemma. Okay, so we have a couple people. Drew, did they go through that with C.S. Lewis stuff in here? So C.S. Lewis's trilemma, and I would say, I don't know what to call it, quadrilemma, whatever now, is the idea of who was Jesus really? Who here has heard people say, oh, he was a good moral teacher? Yeah, everybody wants to claim Jesus was a good moral teacher. In fact, this is one of the fun facts. Every single world religion that I can think of, except for maybe Zoroastrianism, has a spot in it for Jesus. In fact, within Muslim eschatology, there's even a second return of Christ. Buddhism, Hinduism, yeah, sure, add him in. Jesus, great moral teacher. We are the only religion that really centers around Jesus as our primary person. So, like, a lot of people like to say he was a good teacher, but you can't make claims to... Jesus said what? He said, it is God, only God alone can forgive sins, right? And I forgive you. What was he saying? I am God. He didn't say the words, I am God, and a lot of people will point out, Jesus never said he was God. No, but he told you what only God can do, and then he told you, I can do that. That is him claiming to be God. You cannot be a good moral teacher and claim to be God. And if you are a moral teacher and you claim to be God, there's only 2 options. You know that you're not God, and you're saying it anyway, which makes you a big fat liar, or you're really not aware that you're not God, which C.S. Lewis compares him to basically a poached egg. Cuckoo. You got nothing going on. You're either a liar, you're a lunatic, or you're Lord. We don't And Lewis says, we have no other option, and Jesus never intended us to. So that was the first time that I heard, okay, let's think about Christianity kind of in this really logical way. The next series he went through was Evidences for the Resurrection. And so I've even done some grad school work on this. And he took every single Sunday and thoroughly went through one of the alternate explanations. Can anyone name some of the alternate explanations that people give for the resurrection of like, oh, that didn't happen, it was just something else? There you go. Jesus never really died. I believe that's actually a Muslim, that he only gave the appearance of dying. Anybody? Yeah? He survived the crucifixion. Anybody else? Yeah. They took his body. Anybody? Any more? Anybody heard of the swoon theory? Actually, no, the swoon theory was that he swooned, but he resuscitated. No, the other one is also the mass hallucination theory, where everybody hallucinated a risen Lord, but he wasn't actually risen. And so here's the conclusion that I came to when I was actually working on a grad school paper. No matter what, you are left with a miracle. No matter what your theory is, you are left with a miracle. If we believe that he only swooned, that is a miraculous level of recovery to pop back and say, hey, everybody, I'm back and risen and glorified. I mean, if you really study what happens during a crucifixion, that would be a miraculous recovery. Miraculous that he didn't actually die, that you have these guards that if their person doesn't die, they get to die in their place. And all these guys who knew, like, death was their job and they were good at it. But miraculously, they just left this guy up there, wasn't aware that he was actually still alive. That's just like this miraculous oversight. Or maybe the disciples stole the body. The disciples stole the body. Okay, so let's go through this. We have all these guards that are there that are trying to prevent the story from coming out that Jesus was risen. And these are people who can be killed for anything. I had a whole list back when I was teaching this. So many things you could be killed for as a Roman guard. If you have an unsuccessful suicide attempt, they will kill you for that. If you disturb the peace, you can be killed for that. If you fall asleep on the job, you can be killed for that. So, okay, let me see. What we're talking about here is all these guys who can basically be killed for sneezing too loud practically, all fell asleep. The disciples came and were able to move this 2-ton stone without waking them up and steal the body. That's a miracle. That's a miraculous level of sleep and dreaming and whatever you want to call it. Or Jesus moved the body, or everybody went to the wrong tomb. That's my favorite miracle. It's like this miraculous level of stupidity. That you could only have an entire group of people be that dumb if it's a miraculous level of stupidity. That nobody could remember where that pesky tomb was. No matter what your theory, you're left with a miracle. And so why don't we choose the miracle that makes the most sense? That was the series that he went through, and my little 12-year-old brain was just, I'd never even thought to ask these questions, let alone realize that they had answers. And so I was sitting there just taking notes, and it's like my whole world opened up at that point that I thought, this isn't like, I didn't even have a category for me believing this is true versus this actually being true. Like, for legit, real's true. It didn't even occur to me that those could be different things, but they are. And usually every kid will come to that conclusion at some point. Oh, do I just believe that's true or do I actually think? But usually it's too late. Had he looked and expected the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy instead of having this very, very rigid view of inerrancy, he may not have walked away. Well, he also had kind of a problem of evil, but we won't go into that. But he now spends his whole life talking about how Jesus was kind of invented through the scriptures, which brings us to our quadrilemma, the idea of Jesus as legend instead of liar, lord, or lunatic. That the Bible is untrustworthy. Basically, and someone asked several years ago when we were at this talk, what level of evidence, and this is a guy who has his PhD in like historical documents. They said, what level of evidence would it take to convince you that what we have, the debate was on Mark, that what we have in Mark is real? And he said, multiple copies written within 2 weeks of the events. Multiple copies written within 2 weeks of the events. Aside from the Bible, the next most attested document is like hundreds of years from when the originals were written. There's some that's like 900 years, and that's like our top things. And we only have like 5 copies. That would be like Plato or Homer's Odyssey. And he's asking for multiple copies within 2 weeks. What he's saying is there is no level of evidence that would satisfy him, because you cannot be a historian and reject all of historian methods for just that document and still have a job. The only thing he could ever say is, we don't know anything, we'll never know anything. Have a good night. But he picks the Bible, and he just picks it apart of why we can't be sure about it. In fact, I hear him, how do you know for sure? That's like his thing that he'll say 1,000 times. But even he, making this his life's work, you can find buried in a footnote in one of his books saying, but none of this affects the message of Christianity. That'd be nice for him to lead with instead of burying that in a footnote. So these were like the three series that my pastor went through that completely changed my life. I kind of forgot about apologetics for a while. No, actually, I was still really into it in high school. I wrote papers on it in high school, and it wasn't until college when I started going off and kind of trying to find my career. I didn't do as much with it. And then when I met my husband, he was just finishing his MDiv at a place called SES in apologetics. And at that point, like, I kind of started getting into it again. I always thought, I'm going to be the little woman next to him in his ministry, because he has, double bachelor's, an MDiv, a THM, and a PhD, and all this stuff. So of course I'm going to be following him around, and I was fine with that. Until I got involved with this group called Women in Apologetics. At the time, it was called International Society of Women in Apologetics. And the founder was a friend of mine at the time, and I kind of went to her and said, I got to ask, why do we need something for women in apologetics? Why can't we just do apologetics? That seems like I was fine doing apologetics. And she really opened my eyes to the idea that there was a lot of women out there who would not read things unless it was by women for women. And all of a sudden, my brain went, poof. And I went straight from who's equipping the women to, oh my gosh, who's equipping the moms? And at that point, I had a couple other circumstances that all happened kind of around the same time, where I saw this woman whose son had walked away, and she was never interested in anything intellectual, and suddenly started studying philosophy and postmodernism and apologetics. And I thought, that's an instinct. What is that? I was like, that's like a mama bear. A mama bear is someone who will rise up and do something that they would never do for themselves, but they will do it because they see their child being threatened. I was like, that would be really good to harness, which is kind of how Mama Bear Apologetics came about. So these are some of the books that we have right now. We've got the first one, the green one. That's we call that the OG. That's the original Mama Bear Apologetics book. The second one we did was the cream-colored book. The blue one is the update to the cream-colored book. And then the final one was the pink one, which I got tired of going into the ICU after writing books, so we did one on prayer. But the original book I was a nobody. Nobody knew who I was. Some people knew who I was. When Mama Bear Apologetics came on the scene, it was like almost overnight. We got a lot of attention because every single woman out there was like, sign me up. I know what a mama bear is. I know I am one. What can I do? And so I actually looked at all the other books that it was for parents, and what they did is they all had individual questions, who made God, and why, whatever, all these, how do we know Jesus really lived, and, all these specific questions. My friend Natasha writes great books on that, or she did. She's moved on from there. And I said, my one thing is I don't want to write a book that's already been written. And I actually didn't even want to write a book. It was a publisher that came to me asking to write a book. It was a friend of mine meeting with one of the editors, and he said, what can you tell me about Mama Bear Apologetics? And she's like, oh, that's a friend of mine. So they came to us, and I said, okay, well, if we're going to do it, I don't want to do a book that's already out there. So what I did is I categorized all those questions that Natasha had already come up with, and I said, what philosophy is undergirding each of these? And that's kind of what became the Mama Bear Apologetics book. Is we go through, number one, just the statistics on youth walking away, and then we talk about, A lot of women just don't even like the word apologetics. To them, it sounds like people who just argue for a living and they're just over it. They want peace and happiness in their sphere. We address that. We go through something called linguistic theft. Linguistic theft was originally one of the other chapters of something that was going on until I realized, no, this isn't really a worldview. It's a tactic to basically support a worldview. Linguistic theft is you're taking words that everybody already knows and agrees upon, changing the definitions, and then putting that out as tools of propaganda. So, I mean, we think of the word love. Has that word been changed a lot? When you see the word love, do you immediately think of just, oh, you know, sacrificing for somebody? Love is love. That's just everybody trying to serve each other, right? No, not so much. The word pride, the word justice. They literally will, there is certain people who are propagandizing that will tack the word justice onto everything, including the ones, so just think about what happened with the idea within transgenderism, the idea of, hey, maybe boys are gonna have a period. They literally called it period justice. Because if there was anything that was unequal, it was unjust. And the boys, you poor boys, you didn't have tampons in your bathrooms. What an injustice. They will take any possible thing and label it injustice. Yes. But in the Greek, do you know the word justice has two different translations? It's the same word for two different concepts. You know what they are? Justice, which we would already agree upon, and righteousness. Those words are the same word in the Greek. And what they're asking us to do is they're not saying we want to have a right and righteous understanding of something. We just want it to be equal, and it doesn't matter why or how we make that. I will tell you this right now. Equal opportunity is a good thing. We should fight for equal opportunity. Equal outcomes is very different. There is one way and one way only to guarantee equal outcomes. Can anyone tell me what that one way is? So you have people that are actively suppressing it. Total control is the only way to have equal outcomes. Only if I am controlling the outcomes can those be equal. Who here loved group projects in high school? Who here was the one that did all the work in group projects while everybody else just did whatever? That was me. It's okay to own it. You will not see, it's like we cannot have equal outcomes if we have people with unequal, we'll just say, just the basics, like unequal intellects. But the biggest one is unequal amount of motivation. I was very motivated to try to get that good grade, and other people were motivated to eke by with a, 69.6. And that was good enough for them, as my youth pastor used to say, C's get degrees. And you put us into a thing together, and that person who really couldn't care less is like, sweet, I gotta go get her. She'll make it happen. We will never have equal outcomes when we have people with different expectations, different levels of ability, different personalities, different motivations. You will never have it. The only way to have equality at that point is for someone else on the outside to control everything. And that is the only way to make it happen. I'm getting way far off of what I was planning to talk about. Anyway, so my Mama Bear, so that's what we did in the first book, is we went through all these different, linguistic theft, that's how we got there. We went through all these different, what I call isms, that were undergirding a lot of these questions. So we had one that I had no idea where to put it, and that was a self-helpism, which honestly is more of a female thing than a guy thing. A lot of guys aren't reading like the self-help books, because they feel so inadequate, and how do I feel better about myself? But women are. And so we need to put that in perspective. But then all the other ones are things that basically everybody deals with. The idea of postmodernism, the idea that we got rid of truth. In fact, the lady that I was talking about at the beginning, who her son walked away, and she was like, what happened? She said, how did we have this whole shift in postmodernism and nobody told us? Nobody prepared us for this. So postmodernism essentially says, that even if there is absolute truth, nobody can know for sure. So some people just say postmodernism says there's no absolute truth. Absolute truth is things that are true for everyone at all times and all places. Subjective truth is things that depend on me. It's what I believe, my preferences, my beliefs. That's a subjective truth. Or even it can be my experiences. I can be in a room and say, I'm like, with my husband, I'm like, it's so cold in here. And he likes to always be like, oh, it feels so good, just to revel in the fact that he can keep it at like 60 degrees. Even that is going to be a subjective truth. But objective truths would be things like torturing babies for fun is wrong. Everywhere, all time. You cannot find me a civilization where I'm like, okay, maybe it's okay for them. That is an absolute objective truth. And we have absolute objective truths not only in the physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm. It's called moral facts. People take morals and they assume that that's all subjective. It's what I believe. Instead of saying, no, there are moral facts, things that we were designed as people, as creatures of God, that are true or false for everybody. So we just kind of went through all these different ideas of how we got to the place in our society that we're at now. The second book, Guide to Sexuality, did not want to write that one. I avoided it like the plague, and then COVID happened, and I thought, holy cow, we might all lose our jobs, and they're offering me at least enough money for the year, so I'll go ahead and take it. And the whole time after that, I thought, what did I do to myself? Why did I say yes? But honestly, that was one of the best things I ever did. That was, for me, what it meant to conquer fear, because this isn't just one of those books that's like, well, this is what this Bible says, and, God said it's just a mommy and a daddy, and they make a baby, and they're together for life in the end. That's not this book. This book does talk about what God has called us to do, what God has called us to be. The first chapter talks about how sexual faithfulness is a non-negotiable for a Christian. I will tell you what, I did not realize how many verses there were about sexual immorality in the New Testament, and still I started studying this, and I'm like, holy cow, how have we gotten this how have we made this like an agree to disagree kind of thing? Because we have. This has become an agree to disagree kind of situation. I remember trying to learn Italian once, back when we lived in Dallas, and so I probably wouldn't do this anymore without like getting your head chopped off. I advertised on Craigslist as like, anyone want to learn Italian with me? And this girl was like, yeah, I'd love to. We got together and we ended up talking about faith. She went to a neighboring church, and then she's talking about how her small group is throwing them a housewarming party for her and her boyfriend moving in together and buying a house. So there is a verse in Jeremiah that says they have forgotten how to blush. That not only are people deviating from God's design, but they're not even aware that this is something they should be embarrassed of. Even with the church, usually people at least know enough to try to hide it. Because, we have sin, we try to hide it. It's when people stop even trying to hide the sin that they're not even aware that this is wrong. Amy, one of my other Mama Bears, has taught or has substituted at both Christian and non-Christian schools. And there would be these kids that were like hands in the air and worshiping. And then she hears their conversation, because y'all don't care what you say around substitute teachers, but they're listening. And they're all talking about how they're going over someone's house that weekend to watch 50 Shades of Grey. Didn't even occur to them that, hey, maybe this isn't good. Or talking about their favorite porn clips. I've been in on college campuses listening to the booth next to me of all these kids talking about their favorite porn clips. They have forgotten how to blush. And this isn't just forgetting the word of God. What we have now with a lot of the things going on with kind of the alphabet brigade, shall we say, is people who are using political issues in order to justify their sexuality. I have a friend, I kid you not, her son identifies as a girl, dating a girl who identifies as a guy. He calls her his boyfriend. She calls him her girlfriend. And yet, my friend will listen to them in the other room as he pelts the girlfriend with Nerf guns while she's going, stop it. I mean, total, gender stereotypes in check. But he actually admitted to her at one point, I'm just so tired of being dumped on as a guy. I'm so tired of being dumped on as a white man. So we can even have people that have no interest in some kind of other sexuality, but what they do is they are so tired of being told that they're an oppressor, and being told that they're an oppressor comes from Marxism, which then informed critical theory. So Marxism says that everything is a product of the haves and have-nots. Critical theory says everything can be divided in terms of who has power and who doesn't. It's not necessarily the money. And then once you put identity politics, now we're going to divide up people into all these different categories and which ones have more social power and which ones have less social power. And the ones that have more social power, you better shut up and sit down. In the words, the ones that don't have the social power, you can do whatever you want. Have you seen clips? Okay, who's the guy that was in, he played The Flash. He was also in one of the Dumbledore, not Crimes of Dumbledore, there was the one before that, the Fantastic Beasts things, where he plays the guy that turned, like, his magicalness, that he had to squelch it. Does anyone else know what I'm talking about? That actor, there's video of him being arrested, and all he does is scream, I'm non-binary, I'm not comfortable with this, I'm non-binary, because he knows that if he can be part of that alphabet brigade, he is untouchable. And he's shocked when some police are like, yeah, it doesn't matter, you threw a chair at somebody. You're going away, we're taking you. I've seen more videos than I care to admit of them, someone saying, I'm transgender and I don't feel comfortable with this, I'm that, not because they're confused about who they are, but because they've realized that identifying as something else will actually change the amount of power that they have. Now, the Christian parents, God love them, that are trying to teach their kids about sexuality and all they can talk about is a mommy and a daddy, have no idea why their child is suddenly coming home with blue hair and identifying as they, them. It has nothing to do with sexuality and everything to do with the trickle down of Marxism to critical theory to identity politics to where we are now, which is kind of queer theory. So I want to talk about the power of a worldview. So I want everybody, starting here, everybody get a buddy. So there might be one group of y'all that have like 3 people. Everybody get a buddy. And you're going to decide one of y'all is going to be group 1 and one of y'all is going to be group 2. So we're going to have like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 like that. Okay, does anyone not have a buddy? Anybody? Okay. I want everybody to close their eyes and we are going to do an experiment. This is our experiment, our evil scientist. Y'all are getting like a total Frankenstein of all my other PowerPoints and I'm like, I'll use this, I'll use that. So yeah. Okay, so I want everybody to close their eyes. No peeking, keep your eyes closed. And okay, first, make sure you know, all the 1s, raise your hand. All the 2s, raise your hand. If you're not sure what you are, figure that out now. Okay. Okay, eyes closed now. You can pick whichever one you want to be. Just pick. Between the 2 of you, pick one to be a 1, one to be a 2. Okay. Everybody's eyes closed now, and I'm going to read a statement. You encounter a large, dangerous-looking man in a mask while you are walking in the grass. He looks like he's ready to knock you down. Think about what you will do next. Keep your eyes closed. I'm going to say it one more time. You encounter a large, dangerous-looking man in a mask while you're walking in the grass. He looks like he's ready to knock you down. Think about what you will do next. Now, only the 1s. Open your eyes. Just the 1s, not the 2s. 2s, keep your eyes closed. And I'm going to read this statement again. You encounter a large, dangerous-looking man in a mask while you're walking in the grass. He looks like he's ready to knock you down. Think about what you will do next. Okay, everybody close their eyes again. Okay, now only the 2s. Open up your eyes. Only the 2s. You encounter a large, dangerous-looking man in a mask while you're walking in the grass. He looks like he's ready to knock you down. Think about what you will do next. Okay, everybody open their eyes, and we're going to do an experiment here. You're going to talk with your buddy. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to tell each other the answer, okay? Is assault about to happen? Look at each other and talk. Don't talk anything. It's just yes or no. You can't say why. Don't worry. You're just answering each other yes or no. Okay, next one. Should you report him to the police? It's just yes or no. Tell each other yes or no. Okay. Okay, next question. Should you push him back? Okay, next question. Should he be punished? Next question. Should he be rewarded? No. I love this. Okay, final question. Should you defend yourself with a knife? Okay, who here had completely different answers from their partners? So let's look at the two pictures y'all look at. So you can kind of see why y'all had different, okay, back up here. You can see why you had different answers, can't you? Worldview matters. Worldview matters. Think about, there was a movie that came out. You had Frozen, then you had Frozen 2. There was an entire song in Frozen 2 about doing the next right thing. The next right thing radically depends on how you already see the situation. So what if I had never showed you this and I was like, y'all need to argue until you get it, till you figure out what should happen? You would probably never agree, right? This process happens every single day with people who have a different worldview from Christianity. Who here has heard the phrase that diversity is our strength? So that comes from one study that was done that showed that when you had a specific problem that everybody's working on, if you got people from, engineers, and then you had other people who were, what else? Engineers, astronauts, geophysicists, physicists, chemists. When you got all these different perspectives together, you were able to actually get further along on that problem than if you just had one, if you only had the engineers or you only had the physicists. And so they said, aha, diversity is our strength. But what are they, that experiment, that study, what were people unified around? What did they agree on? The goal. They agreed on what the problem was and how they were going to be addressing the problem. Then they had different perspectives. What if they had different views on what the goal was? Do these two things have different goals? Do they have different intentions? Different motivations, all the different things? Even something as simple as saying man is basically good at his core, or mankind is basically evil at his core. That right there is a worldview statement. And you have people that are all trying to make laws and make policies, and they're coming from these two different worldviews. Now, the Christian worldview says, man is basically evil. We suck. You put us along, everybody, when they do what's right in their own eyes, you just get chaos because nobody can agree. Everybody's going to be selfish, and you don't have to teach us how to do it. There is not a 2-year-old out there that saw modeled for them by their parents throwing something down, screaming at the top of their lungs, and then punching somebody. Very few toddlers had that modeled for them forever. But you see another toddler try to take a toy away from another toddler, and what happens? Screaming, throwing, kicking, biting. You didn't have to teach it to them. They did it all on their own. When people think that people are basically good, I'm like, have you had kids? Because that really should disabuse you of this idea. We don't need to be taught how to be bad. Now, we do sometimes see, I would say, within a culture that has a Judeo-Christian worldview, you will still have the law of God written in people's hearts. And so I'm not going to say that people are incapable of doing good unless they're Christians. I think that's a false statement because, think about a lot of the floodings that happened, especially in Texas. Love my Texans. You have traffic for miles backed up of all these yeehaw guys with their truck and their boat ready to go save some lives, taking off work. They're going to make it happen. That is the Imago Dei right there. They can do good because that is what our society has largely valued. Now you get yourself in a society that's completely divorced from Judeo-Christian worldview, and we're seeing this happen over in England and the British Isles, where all these other worldviews are coming in, and you're seeing trash, you're seeing violence, you're seeing rapes. Because I've heard some people from African countries saying, in our country, the highest good is providing for your family. None of us would say that's a bad thing. We should all provide for our family, right? But that's the highest good, which means that if I am in a place of authority, I'm going to cheat, lie, and steal if that provides for my family, because that is the highest good. Put that next to a Judeo-Christian worldview that says the highest good is kind of this objective view of morality, and you tell the truth, you don't take what's yours, keep your hands and objects to yourself, not violent. You put those two worldviews together, they're not going to come to the same conclusion. The next several months is going to be life-changing for y'all, because this is like fish who've been swimming in water who are finally having to understand what is the water we've been swimming in. There are things in the world that have so permeated your thoughts and ideas that you don't even realize that you believe them, and they are completely unbiblical. That is why we have a 4% of Christians that have a biblical worldview, because we don't even know what it is that we've been swimming in. So why do we do what we do as apologists? It's basically, we are not just defending Christianity, we are defending a biblical worldview. A biblical worldview does not mean that I can just attach a verse to something and call it a day. Let me give you an example of what a biblical worldview might look like. We're going to say, can anyone tell me what shape that is? Heart. Everybody knows it's a heart, right? It's pretty obvious. Which point, which exact dot tells me that that's a heart? Exactly. It's all of them. Now, how many times have you heard people say, well, where exactly does the Bible say X, Y, Z? Where exactly does it say? People think that there's going to be this one-to-one correlation with you have a verse and a belief, and a verse and a belief. And they don't realize that sometimes there's a whole bunch of verses. In fact, there could be verses like, this one sounds like it's saying that, and that one sounds like it's saying that. These are like not agreeing with each other, but you know what? You put those together in tension with everything, and okay, we start to get a shape. Which means that sometimes I need to act like that, going in that direction. And sometimes I need to act like this. This might be the concept of truth and compassion. Sometimes I need to err on the side of truth of like, nope, what you're doing is wrong. We cannot go there. Other times we might need to be like, you know what, the truth is going to come right now. This person needs someone to sit with them. These are both true within the Christian worldview. But unless we have a picture of that Christian worldview, we don't understand the Christian worldview. Who here has listened to just, any number of Charlie Kirk's little conversations that he's had on college campuses? Anybody? Yes, amen, I love that. So there's a lot of people that criticized Charlie Kirk, saying, well, you're going way far outside of what the Bible teaches. And you know what? It's because they're saying, I can't find a one-to-one verse for everything that you say. Because think about even something as simple as immigration. We'll have this verse over here that says to basically take care of the foreigner. And I don't know if y'all have this. I know on my feeds, there's like this picture that goes around all the time that it's like, I can't remember which verse it is, but it's in the Old Testament about taking care of the foreigner and the immigrant. And they're like, apparently people don't read their Bible. Why aren't you reading your Bible? This is what your own Bible says. Well, you know what? We have that, and we can't ignore that. But you know, we also have, if you don't work, you don't eat. These are both part of the Christian worldview. We can't attach a verse to everything and think it's that simple. A lot of times it's not. This is where we have nuance that comes in, and we have to say, what is the picture that Bible is trying to paint from this? That's going to be another aspect of worldview. So we as apologists aren't always just saying, we're going to defend the inerrancy of Scripture, we're going to defend the existence of Jesus, the existence of the resurrection, and who Jesus was, and that's it. Case closed. When we defend the biblical worldview, it means that sometimes we will be getting into things that sound political to some people, because there's a difference between politics and morality. The church has not gone into politics. Politics has started dabbling in morality and said, we're going to call that politics, and now as per your own separation of church and state, you're not allowed to go there anymore. We are not the ones that have changed. The church is not the ones who have changed. Politics has claimed things that are rightfully the domain of religion. And where it claims a right within religion, we need religion to stand up and say, not your idea, this is God's idea. Marriage, not your idea, that's God's idea. Gender, not your idea, that's God's idea. Family, not your idea, that's God's idea. Government, not your idea, that's God's idea. God established the family. He establishes government. And we are called to submit to our government, but we are also called to be involved in government. In fact, the word, I'm doing some study on this, so Drew, if you've heard something else, tell me. The word ecclesia is usually translated as church in the New Testament. But the word ecclesia doesn't just mean a church building like what we think. Ecclesia was the place where people would come together to make decisions about the community. That was what the church was supposed to be. When Jesus says, upon this rock, I will build my ecclesia. He's not just saying, upon this church, or upon this rock, I'm going to build this building over here that doesn't interact with anything else over here. No. Upon this rock, I'm going to build my ecclesia, which means this is going to be part of how people make the decisions. There are certain things that, now, we don't need to go in and make things a theocracy, where like we take away all freedom except for what the Bible says, that we haven't been called to that. In fact, freedom of religion was originally a Christian idea. After they saw all the horrible things that happened, like during the Inquisition, stuff like that, you cannot bully someone into believing in Christ. All you have is someone who's terrified, whose heart has not been regenerated. That is not what Christ is wanting. So as apologists, that's what we are doing now. We are not just doing biblical apologetics, resurrection apologetics. We're also doing cultural apologetics, and that is starting to reach into different aspects that it's not hasn't been in before. So how do we do this? Do we need to take a break? How long have I been talking? An hour? Let's take a 10-minute break. This school that was in the Louisville School District, where it was the kids that were not, they were worse than in-school suspension, but not quite at juvie yet. And so I was in a room full of guys, and so sometimes I would just be like, they would just get all squirrely, and I'm like, okay, push-up contest. They just had to like get it out, and then they could sit down and concentrate. It was amazing. Okay, so let's summarize what we talked about. So I want everybody to just give me, I'm gonna start over here. Give me one main takeaway from basically, you're gonna get picked on because like y'all are the first ones. What's one big aha moment you had from our first half? Totalitarianism. Yep, that's an important. There's a really good book called The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Really good. Okay, Alex.
I also like that as well, but I also like just the point you made with going back to the crucifixion, how like even if it's like faked or it's a little spotted, whatever, there's still like something there that's like this miraculous.
Yep, you're left with a miracle. Jamie?
I thought it was really interesting how you talked about how like the worldview of the world can sink into our worldview without us ever even knowing. Kind of like made me think about things that I might believe that I don't even realize.
Yep. Okay, coming back to you.
I like how you pointed out how all the political war and stuff is kind of trying to impede on what belongs to the church.
Exactly.
The arguments that belong to the church.
I'll come back to you in a second after we have a couple more. Okay, next.
I appreciated a bunch of the stuff you said. I love that you said kind of figure out like why do I believe what I believe, and kind of tying into like there's no problem with the testimony being like, oh, I just grew up in my church and I've loved Jesus for as long as I can remember, but trying to figure out also like, but why? And then also I loved your point about salt, and like salt is called to preserve.
Nice.
And we are to stand against anything that does not preserve.
Very good. Next.
I really liked how you talked about equal opportunity is good, but equal outcome is only achieved by suppressing or controlling everyone else.
Very good. Next.
I like the one comment at the very beginning that you said apologetics is 99% relationships.
What I loved that you said, where was it? I loved how you talk about how there are so many verses about sexuality in the New Testament, and it feels like everybody is just cherry picking from the gospel nowadays and just completely ignoring how much evidence there is, because I feel like we don't realize how often people abuse the cherry picking of power.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, I would say, I think it's Acts 17, where they're like, oh my gosh, we have all these Gentiles coming into the church. What do, we've got 613 rules. Which ones are the most important? They narrowed it down to 4. It was like, don't eat the blood of strangled animals, don't do idolatry, sexual immorality, and then there was a 4th one that I can never remember. But sexual immorality was like one of those 4. Like, if we were going to boil everything down to what we're going to require the Gentiles, it was 1/4 of that. Yeah, keep going.
I liked what you about the apologetics thing being relational, and I really liked your story about how you came upon the book, thinking about having women learn about apologetics and just seeing like overall just learning about apologetics for everyone. So I really like that.
Thanks.
Yeah, you said a lot of awesome things in there, but the big ones for me were the 4% of Christians only have a biblical worldview. I thought that was very intriguing.
Yeah.
And then also kind of like what Davey was saying with the salt and kind of, slowing the boil of the water, not necessarily stopping the boiling, but at least slowing it down. I just thought that was interesting.
I like how you talked about the soft totalitarianism.
Totalitarianism. I know it's a tongue twister, isn't it?
I can't say that word.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a good definition. It helped me understand it better.
Oh, good.
I liked when you talked about justice and righteousness having the same Greek word, because I hadn't really thought of those two being so closely related like that. And I also appreciated the liar, lunatic, and Lord, everything in that.
Nice.
I really appreciated the kind of evidence for the resurrection and like the reliability of Scripture, where you're like, you have to reject like most of history if you're going to reject, a lot of these New Testament books.
Nice.
I really liked how you talked about how you can't just rely on like one verse, like that picture you showed, and like how people, when they're like debating you, like they'll focus on like one thing in the Bible and they'll be like, you can't like believe this because of this, but you have to look at like the whole picture that Scripture is like painting for us. So.
Yep.
I really enjoyed just kind of like the overview of like understanding like we're so easily deceived by the world and we're so easily influenced, but we need a strong foundation, and also just understanding different worldviews so then we can actually have a productive conversation and then give them like the light of Christ and be the salt and light.
Very good.
I liked how you brought up how like easy it is to get canceled, kind of like with the BLM thing, and then also that we don't need to be taught how to be bad.
Yeah, right? I think there's like some movie that's like I can do bad all on my own or something. I can't remember what it is, but yeah.
I like the visual you gave us with the dots that make the heart, and how like one verse could say something that sounds like it's going the opposite way of another verse that's saying something completely different, but how like they all come together to like make what love really is, and how you can do that with everything.
Yep.
It just really like helped me. So
There's so many competing things that are in tension, but it's that tension that gives them shape.
I really liked when you said we're called to prevent the decay of society. I really enjoyed that, just kind of coming from a different view of it. Just seeing that our society is decaying, and that we're just kind of there to be the salt and light and just kind of add the flavor back.
That's right.
I also really liked how you said anything that prevents decay in society is something we are called to do. And I think as we have continued to grow up in this world and just seeing everything decay more and more and all the evil, like we are called, and, like we notice that, and we're called to do something about it and act on it.
Yeah, and I'll even kind of specify with this. This is I believe it's either First or Second Peter, which is really great passages on basically how to live in a persecuted world. And sometimes it's not even us going out and doing something to prevent decay. It is just us doing and being who Christ called us to. That just a mere presence of Christians in a society can help. That itself will spread. There's this beautiful thing that you see when people are looking at maybe like antibiotics, when they're looking at how it's affecting different bacteria. So they'll grow all this bacteria and they'll put one little dot of the antibacteria in there, and you'll see it kind of spread out over time to where it affects the thing next to it, and that affects the thing next to it, and that affects the thing next to it. It doesn't have to go and like scrub everything down. Just being who it is and being present has that effect of slowing down the decay. So I just wanted to add that. And First and Second Peter are great for learning about that.
I really liked what you said about supporting equal opportunity, not equal outcomes, and how you highlighted that it was because different people are different, and we can kind of be blinded by like the whole, like everybody should have equal rights kind of like movement today, and that it's not about if you're a guy or a girl or this or that. It's about who you are as a person.
I thought it was interesting what you had to say at the beginning when you asked us to close our eyes and raise our hands, and is apologetics for unbelievers or believers? And I'd kind of come into this with the notion of, well, of course, the believers don't need it because they're believers, and it's for the unbelievers. And then what you had to say about believers are some of the hardest people to evangelize to and to minister to because they're so confident. They're like, no, I got this. Go talk to somebody who doesn't believe. We're on the same page here, and with the linguistic theft, and we are saying the same thing, but we're not meaning the same thing. And so it's some of the hardest people to talk to.
Excellent.
I liked what you said about how other religions claim Jesus as a great moral teacher, but that doesn't make any sense because he claims to be God, and a good moral teacher would not call himself God. I really liked that.
I liked in the beginning when you said that apologetics is defending the faith, but then later on, like halfway through, you restated it as defending the biblical worldview, and I liked that because it just made me think about how different people have different people have their faith for a different reason. Like there's no one moment that everyone has of like this exact moment of faith like in the same way. So, but if we all have the biblical, like the same goal, like you were talking about, the same goal of defending the biblical worldview, then it'll be much more succinct to be able to like whoever we're talking to about it.
Yeah.
I like the analogy that you made of the salt in the boiling pot and how society can be like the boiling water, and that when you add salt, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem, but
helps it simmer down a little.
Yeah, it kind of makes it more bearable so you can talk to them about whatever you need to.
Very good.
What stood out to me was the illustration, the guys in the mask, that exercise. When it comes to what somebody believes is true, context is really what matters. That really helped me understand that a lot.
Good.
What I found interesting was when you brought up the mob in regards to BLM, and the mob can be controlled by people, and they don't necessarily know what the whole context as to what they are being used for.
Yes.
But they're just being used for what they perceive.
Very good. And that's a really good point. So he was saying that sometimes when you have a mob, they're actually being used for something. And this is where I like to make a difference between sometimes people, and especially Christian people in the church, will kind of turn things into an us versus them situation. We keep talking about us as the in group and them as the out group. What if we were to think of people who are being used as more of a captive rather than a rebel? Is anybody familiar with something called Stockholm Syndrome? So Stockholm Syndrome was, I think it was originally done over like in Stockholm. It was named after it. That there was, I believe it was a bank or something like that, where you had some people taking people hostage, but then they started forming relationships with the people that they took hostage, to where when the police came and tried to free the hostages, they were actually defending the kidnappers because they had formed that bond. That is what we see happening with the world and with these ideologies. And I go into this in the sexuality book, that we have people who have these dangerous and damaging ideologies, and they will fight tooth and nail for them, but they don't realize that they are fighting for the thing that has captured, it has taken them captive. And there's even passages in scripture that say, that we continually preach Christ, because you never know when someone will come to their senses and stop having to be captive to the enemy, forced to run his errands. So it's a real different way of looking at the us versus them. And then you had something extra that you wanted to say.
No, I just had a question.
Oh, okay.
Who was that book that you mentioned by the psychology of totality?
Oh golly, I can't remember who the author is. It wasn't someone I'd really heard of, but the book is just straight black. It's hard to miss. So you just look Psychology of Totalitarianism, and it's just a straight up black book. But yeah, it's really good. Well, good. I was like, we should probably review. And then I'm like, I don't want to review. Y'all review. So y'all did an excellent job kind of summarizing what we talked about in the first one. I appreciate that. It's always nice to know like kind of what lands and what sticks out. So that is kind of, we've talked about the need for apologetics. We've talked about what apologetics is, both in terms of, Christian apologetics for defending things specifically about the faith, but then also worldview apologetics. So now we're going to talk about how do we do apologetics, because a lot of times people are like, yes, okay, what do we do? And that's where things get a little murkier. So I'm going to introduce you to something that we have in the Mama Bear books. And it'll be slightly different for y'all, but the first 3 steps are the same for everybody. So we call it the ROAR method because people like something that, matches whatever. We had one of our girls who's good with alliteration. We had started this out, I kid you not, with the 6 Ds. It was like detect, discern, whatever, and I could never remember them. So we're like, yeah, if we can't remember it, nobody else can. So we went with the ROAR method. So ROAR stands for recognize the message, offer objective discernment. I added the objective in later because it's important. Argue for a healthier approach, and then reinforce these ideas through discussion, discipleship, and prayer. And that last one really has to do more with, it'll either have to do with teachers or it has to do with parents. Anytime, or if you're even a youth leader, trying to figure out if you're trying to teach young people how to do this, you have to kind of have practice. But if you're just interacting with somebody, let's talk about the ROA, and we're going to discuss, there's actually something smaller called the affirmation burger model that I'll teach you how to do. So recognizing the message, this is where you are identifying what is the worldview that this person believes. And a lot of times it may not be completely stated. You have to look past what the stated thing is. But it's going to be something where anybody who watches this is going to come away with that message. It's not something that people are like, well, I disagree on that. Recognizing the message is like, most people who watch this can walk away with this. So I would say, well, this is like a really old analogy. Did y'all remember the movie Sing? Yeah. Okay. So like, we live in this tiny little town, and John and I don't have kids. So I was like, I really want to go see this movie. John would not be caught dead there, so I went by myself. Because I'm like, it's cute cartoon animals and singing, like what's not to like? The first 10 minutes of that movie, in classes that I've done for Mama Bear, I've actually showed the first 10 minutes and then talked about Roar, and then we show it again, and people are like, whoa. The number of times the main character lied in the first 10 minutes was insane. Like, it was just lie after lie after lie. Oh yeah, the check's in the mail. Oh yeah, I'm on my way. Oh yes, we already have that act who signed on. Oh, we're almost ready. I mean, it was like lie after lie. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So I told like all my mama bears on Facebook, I was like, if y'all are gonna go see this, you need to tell your kids to take a bite of popcorn every time the main character lies and buy the big box of popcorn. And so that kind of gave, kids something to be like, oh, that one's a lie, that one's a lie. It just makes it fun. But the main message of that movie, if you were to take all those different things in there, the main message of that movie is that the highest priority is excellence in your art. No matter what you do, if it's in service to your art, it's fine. You can lie, you can cheat, you can steal, you can undercross people. As long as it produces really good art, it's all good. That was the main message of the movie. You kind of had to look into it to see it a little bit. So first off is recognizing the message. What are the main messages that are coming? And so sometimes this can take a long time to really evaluate what's going on. The second step is offering objective discernment. So I'll kind of go through what I have in some of my, like I said, y'all are getting sort of a Frankenstein of PowerPoints here that I just pulled stuff over. So offer objective discernment. So I'm going to talk about a couple of verses. So Philippians 1:9-10 says, "It is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve what is excellent, and so be pure and blameless for the day of Christ." Now, who here has heard of things like discernment ministries? Anybody? You will at some point. A lot of times discernment ministries is basically pooping on everybody else's party. It's like, I'm going to find whatever is wrong with everything. And don't get me wrong, that's an important aspect of the Roar method, is being able to identify lies. But we have to recognize that when Scripture talks about discernment, one of the first things we need to do is how to approve what is excellent. How do we find what is true, what is right, what is good, what is beautiful, like it talks about in Philippians for us to think about? How do we identify that first? Because there's this woman that I know, I kid you not, her website or her blog or whatever it is everythingthat'swrongwiththeworld.com or at WordPress or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, let's invite her to the party. And one of my friend's kids asked his mom to do something and she said no. And he's like, you're the party of no. Nobody wants to go to that party. And Christians have become the party of no, of like, oh, that's wrong, oh, that's wrong, oh, that's wrong. It's like we're these moral busybodies that just wag our finger at everybody. But if we look at Scripture, a very important part of discernment is being able to approve what is excellent. Very important part of discernment. Next one, Hebrews 5:14. Solid food is for the mature, for those whose powers of discernment have been trained by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Constant practice to distinguish good from evil. In our first book, I talk about how there is no autopilot in the Christian life. That there's a lot of parents who go about this saying, we're going to categorize things as all safe or all dangerous. This is Christian, it's fine. This is non-Christian, you don't watch that. That's not a very good way. A lot of times you're going to find things that are good and bad within the same movie, the same song. In fact, I would say, a lot of times people would be like, well, there's one book that you could never find anything bad in, and that's the Bible. Au contraire, my friends. What does Satan always use in his arguments throughout Scripture? Scripture! He uses Scripture every time in his arguments. How many times have you seen people take verses wildly out of context? Even the Bible, you need to we call it the chew and spit method. Even that you need to be able to roar through. Is this person properly handling the Word of God? Because you cannot go into autopilot. Just because they give you a verse for something does not mean the Bible teaches what they say it teaches. So we're looking for the good and the evil. And then the last one, Colossians 4:6. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So a third component of discernment is not only finding what's excellent, distinguishing it between what's good and what's evil, but now how do I apply it to this person? Because there's a difference between answering a question and answering a person. So who here is friends with, or not friends with, I'm friends with him. Who here knows who Sean McDowell is? Couple of y'all. So he's the son of Josh McDowell. So he has this story that he tells about this time he was getting his hair cut. And this girl started asking questions about the problem of evil. And so he just kind of goes off onto professor mode talking about stuff until he finally notices that she stopped cutting his hair and he turns around and she's crying. And he didn't know what to do. And so he asked his friend as they're leaving, he's like, can you believe her? That was weird. And his friend was like, well, you were acting pretty arrogant. And he had no idea. So he had no idea why she was asking about the problem of evil. Did y'all know what the problem of evil is? It's this objection against God of if there's a good God and he's all powerful, he's all good and he's all powerful, he could theoretically stop evil. We see evil still. That either means God's not all good or God's not all powerful. That's their conclusion. That's the basic problem of evil. It's also this idea if God exists, then why do all these really horrible things happen? If you have a person that's leaving their Philosophy 101 class, that is a very different question than a person who's leaving their father's funeral. The person leaving the philosophy class is asking about the problem of evil for a very different reason than the person who's leaving their father's funeral. The person who's leaving their father's funeral has a very personal reason of, I am in pain. Why would God allow this? And there's honestly a lot of times no answer you can give to that. I mean, just the fact that we feel this much pain when someone dies tells us we were not created for that. We should not be surprised at death. It's not like, what is this death thing you speak of? And how does everybody knows? Because it happens to all of us. It happens to your plants. It happens to your pets. It happens to your family. It should not be a surprise. So why are we destroyed when it happens to someone we love? Because we were not created for a world that had death. We intuitively know. There is no answer that's going to satisfy that person because they are in pain. Now, the person coming from the philosophy class, we can talk about, okay, well, you say, how could God allow so much evil? Well, let's first talk about what is evil and how do you know what evil is? The funny thing about the problem of evil is a lot of times atheists will use it as this gotcha moment, like this is the best argument against Christianity or against God. When in fact, what they're doing is they're acknowledging the existence of good. And if you have something that's good, something that's, less good or more good, you're comparing it to something. What are they comparing it to? How do you know this is evil? How do you know that's just not your preference? You have to have a standard. As C.S. Lewis said, I wouldn't have known what a crooked line was unless I knew what a straight line was. When someone calls something evil, they're saying it's because it's not good. Well, they've identified good. How do you know what is good? You cannot have good without an external source. That's how you might answer the person coming from philosophy. You would never go into that with someone coming from a funeral. So again, that discernment. Prove what is excellent, separate the good from the bad, and know how to answer each person. Again, this is where the relationship comes from. So in order to have good objective discernment, first off, you need to see things accurately. So one of the examples I love giving is back in the 80s, there was this band called AC/DC, which I'm sure y'all have heard of it as well. Do I have any physics guys or girls in here? Anybody? Can anyone tell me what AC/DC stands for? Like the actual... There we go, alternating current, direct current. They saw it on the back of a toaster. They're like, ooh, that stands for power. We're powerful. AC/DC. You had all these parents in the 80s that are like, oh my gosh, Antichrist, devil's children. You can't listen to that music. They were not seeing things accurately. Now, was this music from the pit of hell? Who knows? I don't know. I don't listen to a ton of it. But when their kids found out, oh no, this was referring to the power sign on the back of appliances because they thought it sounded cool, how often do you think those kids went to their parents for objective discernment after that? As Christians, we need to make sure that when we are making a discernment call, that we are seeing things accurately first. Otherwise, we will look like idiots. And there's a lot of people who look like idiots saying that something is one thing when it's not. So next, after being able to see things accurately, we need to be able to separate the good from the bad. So what I usually do with parents, in which I won't ask y'all to do it, but I say, as soon as your kids are old enough to do hand signals, you say, most everything is going to be a mixture of partial truths and lies. You've got to separate the truth from the lies, accept the truth, reject the lies. And you need to expect this in everything that you do. Even a pastor teaching a sermon sometimes will have a mixture of truth and lies that you have to separate. John and I went to a church when we first moved to Fort Worth years ago, when he was in seminary, where they were calling God she from the pulpit, and we're like, and a bunch of other things. But we had a discussion with them. It turns out they were so far postmodern and saying, well, we use that language not to say that God's actually a she, but we want to prove the point that language and words don't really mean anything. And we're like, y'all have fun with your church. We're going over here. So you have to expect everything that you hear is going to be this mixture of partial lies and partial truths, or partial truths usually with the lies. And in fact, it's the truths that make the lies go down easier. And what happens is if you reject all of that partial truth with the lie because you're only looking at the lie, you know what the only thing that person's going to see? All they see is the partial truth. And they say, this person is rejecting this thing that's true. They clearly do not have a good head on their shoulders. They clearly are biased. They clearly don't know what they're talking about. I don't want to ask them questions anymore. So we're always looking for that. But again, separate the good from the bad, embrace the good, reject the bad. So that's kind of like our offer discernment task. And this is something you can be doing as you're having conversations with people out in the world. In fact, at the end of this, we're going to do some practice on this, because it honestly wasn't until last year when I was talking to the Gap kids about this that I realized they were having a really hard time understanding how to identify good in something that they would normally categorize as bad. In fact, later on, as I was doing different talks, I had like a workshop at a Worldview Center in Florida, where I said, I want you to set it up so people are sitting at tables, and I'm going to try to do the same thing. I was shocked at how many people are not able to identify what some of the partial truths are. So we're going to practice on that. And then some people will say, well, how is that biblical? Well, I just want to point out a passage. This is actually a commentary from a passage in Acts that I just found on the way over today. So in Acts 17:28, this is from Bible Hub. It's the question why quote Greek philosophers. Paul declares, for in him we live and move and have our being. And as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. This is a direct quotation of Greek sources, likely Epimenides, for the first phrase, and Aratus, or possibly Cleanthes, not sure how to pronounce that, for the second. Therefore, Paul's usage reflects both his scholarly exposure to secular writings and his willingness to connect with his audience on common ground. So think about Paul. He went to that one place, I think this is like I can't remember where in Acts this is, where he says, I see you have an idol to an unknown God. Are y'all familiar with that passage? He was saying, okay, we got to start somewhere with these people. I can't just come in here and start talking about Jesus. We got to start somewhere. The somewhere that you got to start with is, what can we agree on? And this is something that Charlie Kirk, as he went on, became very, very good at. 26-year-old Charlie Kirk and 30-year-old Charlie Kirk were very, very different. And it was beautiful to see how. And part of that was because he started working with, anybody here know who Frank Turek is? He started working with Frank Turek, who knows how to do this kind of stuff. So he would usually try to find something that the person agrees upon. Because remember, agreeing upon what is excellent is part of discernment. And once you have something that we can both agree on, it is now no longer people duking it out on two different sides, but it's people standing on the same side. It's harder to take a swing at someone that's next to you as opposed to someone who's in front of you. If you're my opposition, it's easy to punch you. If you're next to me, that's a lot harder to take a swing. We want to position ourselves alongside of the person. We're finding something, anything that we can agree on. And that's where we're starting the conversation. So this is where it goes for, like I said, we have the Roar method, but if I were to kind of boil this down, it's called the affirmation burger model. So argue for a healthier approach, the affirmation burger model. So some people, I found this out too late, that apparently there's some other model that they call an affirmation sandwich. Apparently there's I think one of the corporations in Pella does this, and it's very different than what I'm talking about. So the affirmation sandwich would be I need to basically, we'll say, you're my employee and you've done really badly at all this stuff. So I'm we love having you here and we think you're a really great person and you've really added a lot, but you are not performing the way you should. And we have this, and this against you. But again, we love having you here. That's an affirmation sandwich where it's you say good stuff and then you say bad stuff and then you say good stuff again because we got to keep them, morale high. That is not what we're talking about. You are not going out and telling people you're good enough and smart enough and gosh darn it, people like you. That is not what we're doing. We are affirming what is good. Remember, we are positioning ourselves to be on the same side, finding the thing that we can agree upon, and then we're introducing our question, our disagreement, or biblical objection. And this is also a really great way for people who maybe have two different interpretations of Scripture. So you can say, yeah, I know Scripture says X, Y, Z. So they know that I'm recognizing that. But have you thought about these other verses? Because again, we can agree on this interpretation of that one particular verse. So I'm going to give you an example of how I did this once. And it doesn't always go well. It still didn't go well with this person. But it was when we were having the big hoopla about separating kids from their parents on the border. And so there was some girl that was just railing against the president at the time about how he was separating kids from their parents and, that they were creating trauma and these kids were just crying and how dare we and we're evil and everybody else that doesn't agree with me is evil too. And so I kind of came very respectfully and I was like, you know what? You're totally right about how terrifying it is to be separated from your parents. I remember getting separated from my parents once when we were at Disneyland. I looked around, I didn't know anybody. And even sometimes just walking in the grocery store, my heart would go when I realized my mom wasn't in sight. Man, that was so scary. Have I said anything that's a lie? Have I affirmed the point she's trying to make? A little bit. This is her motivation for saying that. So I said, but, and here's where I'm introducing my disagreement, I've heard that they separated at least 1,200 kids from their sex traffickers. This is new information. This is a possible disagreement. So I totally agree with you, man, being separated from your kids or from your parents is so scary. How would you suggest that we separate kids from their traffickers without having this process? And she basically came back and freaked out and told me I was a bigot and blocked me. So it doesn't always work well. Some people do not want to hear any other perspective than what they do. So I like to use that because I think it was really well done, and I like to use it because it did not end well, because it will not always end well, because some people do not like to think. They only like to emote. They like to emote. Don't get your thinking in the way of my emotions. That's a downer on everybody. But again, what happens if you do not affirm what their motivation is for saying it in the first place? What they hear is, they don't understand what I'm saying, I need to yell louder. That is what they usually hear. People will feel like they are in a safe conversation when they feel that the other side actually hears what they are trying to say. And you'd be surprised, a lot of times people have really good motivations. In fact, a lot of times we will even agree on the problem. It's the solution that we don't agree upon, but if we can at least even agree upon the problem, that's one step ahead. So I just want to talk to you all about 2 sets of 3 questions that I want you to write it down, put it on note cards. In all your conversations for the rest of this year, I want you to say it to each other so many times in your conversations that you just want to smack each other, because this is how you need to have conversations when you're out in the world. So the first set of 3 questions, and 2 of them are by a guy named Greg Kokel, the third one is mine. So first off, What do you mean? So Greg Kokel says, what do you mean by that? So someone says, man, we really need to fight for gender justice. Oh, gender justice. Okay, I know what gender is. I know what justice is. What do you mean by gender justice? I'll give you fun fact, true story. First couple years of being married, my husband and I would get in some we don't fight like other couples about, other things. A lot of times we'll end up fighting about ideological things or theological things. There's certain theological topics we're like, no, we just don't talk about that anymore. And our pillow talk and stuff is very different than a lot of other couples. But what I discovered the first couple years of marriage, there were some times when we would be in an argument for 2 hours. I'm not kidding, 2 hours, until we finally came to the conclusion that we actually agreed. But we were using different words for it. But he had an idea, when I said this word, I meant that. So he would counter with this word, which meant that, but we were actually talking about the same thing. We were just using different words. Clarity over agreement. Your job as salt and light in this world. God calls us holy. To be holy means that you're set apart. The way that you are going to be set apart in this time and in this culture is that you are going to engage in productive conversation. And one of the ways to have productive conversation is you have to be sure you know what they are saying. And before they even are clear about what you're saying, because they may not even care what you're saying, you need to be sure that you know what they're actually saying. So, what do you mean by that? Everybody uses words that they think everybody understands. A lot of times they don't. Number 2, how did you come to that conclusion? So we have 2 different kinds of statements people will make. I call them the is statements or the should statements. So the is statements is making what's called a metaphysical claim. This is a statement about reality. And this is where I see people constantly, if they don't want to interact with your ideas, what they're going to do is they're just going to lump all your ideas under a word that everybody hates. Oh, we don't listen to him. He is bigoted. He is misogynistic. She is racist. It's her racist beliefs, her misogyn, whatever. They want to have it under this label. If someone's going to give a label, you need to say, oh, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by racist? I still just coming up in a time when racism actually meant, I think my race is superior to yours. When people say I have black friends and they will make the jokes about fried chicken and watermelon. How did that turn into racism? If you point out something that's maybe distinctive about a race, suddenly that's racism. You got nowadays, it's everybody's kind of, again, it's this powder keg ready to go off. I can have these jokes with my black friends, but not everybody can. But you still are asking, what do you mean by racism? What do you mean by bigot? I know y'all even all got uncomfortable with me just saying that. Not all of y'all, some of y'all. Some people are like, I can't believe she just said that. What do you... Donald, we had one of our black friends lived with us for a year during COVID, and we had all sorts, he ordered fried chicken every single meal. And he was like, I know it, I don't care, I'm a stereotype. He was great, we love Donald. Donald, he's the Don, we love him. So yeah, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that word? Or that is just evil. Oh, you said evil, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by evil? And how did you come to that conclusion? So how did you conclude that event over here, XYZ, was evil? How did you conclude that XYZ was racist? How did you conclude that XYZ was non-Christian or unbiblical? How did you come to that conclusion? And then the final question, so those first 2 are Greg Kokel, the last one is mine, is just what actually happened? So there was a time, I think, when I was putting together my linguistic theft talk, and there was this big hullabaloo going on in Florida with these pastors that were sending out apologies to everywhere saying, oh, we've identified racism and are electing a new pastor and we just apologize to everyone. I went to all these different news sources trying to figure out what had happened. I could not figure out what actually happened until I finally found a news source that the guy that was going to maybe be hired, they didn't run it by anybody. He was an African-American man, and he was very, very strong on critical race theory. And there was a group of people in the church that said, we cannot have critical race theory, and that is antithetical to the gospel, because it is. It says that you can never atone for the sins of your ancestors, and there's just going to be perpetual groveling, and there's no way around it. I mean, just there is no atonement possible when it comes down to it. I recommend, if y'all are, is there anyone here interested in racial issues that are going on? Because I want to recommend that you go to the Center for Biblical Unity, done by my friend Monique Duson, who used to be a critical race theorist and was discipled by my other friend Krista to understand the flaws in it. And now they work together, this white girl and black girl work together to expose the lies that are going on. So the Center for Biblical Unity. Anyway, so I finally found out what actually went on, but it was so hard for me to find out what actually happened, because when people use words that I call category words, what they're doing is I'm interpreting these events for you and letting you know what to think. And that was racist, that was misogynist, that was this, that was that was whatever your ism-ist thing you want to be. What do you mean by that word? How did you come to that conclusion? What actually happened? And if someone is like, oh, well, they just said this racist thing, you say, no. If I were to be making a movie and I needed to instruct the actors and write out a script for exactly what they're supposed to do so that people can see this racist thing that happened, what do I tell them to do and what do I instruct them to say? If they cannot tell you that, they have no idea what happened. And a lot of times people are willing to listen to other people interpreting this for you, but if they don't know what actually happened, they have no right to call it whatever ism they want to call it. So this is where, again, remember I said clarity over agreement. Your job in this time, in this space, to be set apart is to engage in civil dialogue, and that starts with clarity. So that's the first set of questions that, Drew, I want to hear stories of people saying that to each other over and over again. Anytime there's something unclear, that it just becomes so much part of your vernacular that you take it everywhere. So next, again, so we're talking about the is statements versus the should statements. The is statements are, this is reality. Something is racist, something is bigoted, something is whatever. And then there's, that's the is statements. Then there's the should statements. Well, we should do blah, blah, blah. This is where we're solving a problem. So here's our 3 statements that we're asking. And these come from the economist named Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell was a student of Milton Friedman. If you are in the future, an economics class, and this is a Charlie Kirk saying, if you are in an economics class where they do not talk about Milton Friedman or Thomas Sowell, you are not getting an education, you're getting an indoctrination. So Thomas Sowell, he says, for the is statements, in comparison to what? Like, people want to say, oh, America is the most racist society in the world. Okay, in comparison to what? Find me a place that doesn't have racism. My dad used to kind of jokingly say to me, he's like, oh yeah, we have democracy. It's the worst form of government in the world, except for all the other ones. Oh, Christianity, it's the least attested to religion, well, except for all the other ones. If someone's going to make a statement about how bad or how good something is, they need to be comparing it to something. So in comparison to what? Find me a place, and this is where you start seeing that soft totalitarianism and that hard totalitarianism, because when people have something called, are you familiar with a word called utopia? Raise your hand high if you know what the word utopia is. Okay, so utopia is basically a situation, it's basically heaven. It's a situation where everything is fair, everything is perfect, everyone sings songs together in world peace, and it's just this beautiful place. Lots of times people are making comparisons in comparison to utopia. But they're not looking at the real world. And so this is why our job is to say, oh, in comparison to what? Is there a place that doesn't have this situation? So that's our first question. In comparison to what? That's someone who's making an is statement, nature of the world. The second one is at what cost? Who here saw the thing that people are saying that it was ironic that Charlie Kirk said that, and I'm using him as an example because basically I've gone down that rabbit hole for like 3 weeks, that Charlie Kirk said that some gun deaths are necessary for having the Second Amendment. And they'll take that completely out of context. Is there ever going to be, so he compares it to cars. We have like 50,000 automobile deaths a year. Should we ban cars? Somewhere, someone along the line said the convenience of having automobiles, there's going to be a number of deaths, and we've decided that's an acceptable number. Now, if we had 2 million car deaths every year in America, yeah, we'd probably start looking at that and saying, maybe that's not an acceptable number. We will never have a society that has 0 car deaths, just like we're never going to have a society that has 0 gun deaths. They're not looking at, okay, how many times did a person protect themselves because of the guns? Again, at what cost are we making this? And so this would be another thing like, oh, we need to have universal health care. Okay, that sounds great. I would love for everybody to have health care for all. At what cost? How much do we really want to pay for that? How much should every single person be willing to pay for it? We need to have open borders, bring everybody in here, free healthcare, free food, free everything. Okay, at what cost is this? Like, we want to be kind. We want to look after the foreigner and the immigrant. We want to be a place where if someone is experiencing something horrific in their home country, that we can be a place that can shelter them. But at what cost? So we have to look at, there are sometimes things that we can't do, not because people are evil, but because we have limited resources. Are we looking at reality, the limitation of the resources? And I know I'm like I'm getting all political here. I think this is why I think it is important to have the two-party system, because there are going to be truths on either side, kind of like our heart there, that are in tension with one another. Okay. We need to have that tension in order to really get to a good solution. And then finally, what hard evidence do you have for that? A lot of times when people are trying to make something happen in utopia, like my dad's been reading this book on socialism, where the guy just feels certain that we could have an entire company where everybody has the same kind of say. They get to decide how many products they're going to make, where they're going to sell them, who they're going to export them to, and just everybody gets to vote. And how to invest in new technology. I'm sorry, again, these people, have you had a group project before? Like, how did that work? So anyway, this is the YouTube where Thomas Sowell actually used to be a Marxist, and he then started working in government. This is the YouTube where he talks about these 3 questions. Let's see, what time is it, Dad?
You're past time.
I'm past time? How did that second time go faster than the first? Well, dang it, we won't be able to have our practice then.
Hillary,
Yeah.
we can go to 3:30.
Okay.
Spell Thomas Sowell's last name.
Oh, Sowell is how you spell soul. Okay. So so the final thing I want to do is remember how we talked about that no matter what something is, and I really will maintain, and I'm sure somebody could prove me wrong because I just haven't gone down this train of thought, that no matter what we're dealing with, no matter how controversial the topic, we can find something good to agree on. Well, actually, I'm going to give you 6 different things. And so I think there's about 3 people at every table, 2 or 3. I want you to pick which one you're going to talk about. And here's the 6 things that a lot of times you're going to argue for. And what I want you to do is to find something that you can agree with. What is the common ground that you're going to stand on if you were to get in this conversation? So your options are same-sex marriage, gender ideology, meaning like transgenderism, abortion, pro-gun rights, anti-gun rights, and locking up people who are mentally ill against their will. I'm just going to poke all the bears for fun. Because all of these things right here, you can find something. If you have a person so decide what your position is, except for the pro-gun and anti-gun, I guess that's kind of built in. Decide what your position is, what your opponent's position is, and then I want y'all to take maybe the next 7 minutes to come up with a game plan of how you're going to go through your affirmation burger. How are you going to stand on the same side? How are you going to find points of agreement? What are you going to challenge? How are you going to challenge it? Maybe looking at the questions we've used and kind of tell me how this conversation might go. Sorry, You have a question?
You want us to do three individually say what we agree with, or all three of
All three together.
One thing.
All three together working on one thing.
Okay.
Yep, so it's like a bunch of mini group projects. It's fun. Okay, so someone set their watch for 7 minutes. Protects the woman more. Abortion can do harm. And there's a lot of times where there's statistics, again, there's a documentary, and a lot of times you don't want to actually say this, and just tell them, unless you're doing a Charlie Kirk where you have like 3 minutes and you got to get through it. You ask them questions. Do you think there's any harm that comes from women who get abortions? Have you heard about the link between abortion and breast cancer? Would that concern you if you discovered that abortion had a link to breast cancer? What about the number of complications that happen when people are taking the abortion pill? Are you aware of the number of complications? And this is where you can also be kind of keeping like a catalog of things that actually prove the point, instead of just like saying, oh, it causes more harm. No, let's look at the study of the number of women who have no idea what is a normal amount of bleeding versus what is an excessive amount of bleeding post-abortion. That's actually a big one that they're finding with the abortion pill right now. So again, we're taking the thing, we're standing side by side, and we can even phrase our disagreement and objection in something that they already agree with. And then you had the other one that was free will, basically. But I like the way you said it better because it's less Christian-easy. And this is where you can say, oh yeah, totally agree with free will. Do you agree that the baby should have free will? Do we agree for free will for everyone or just for certain people? Okay, if it's just for certain people, which certain people do you think should have free will? Anything they say, you can find some other grown person that doesn't have that. Like they say, oh, it's only people who are conscious. What's the problem if someone says you can only have, bodily autonomy and freedom if you're conscious? Coma. What's something that everybody does every single night? That is lack of consciousness. Can I just go and kill you because you're unconscious? No. But again, we're looking at something they already agreed with and say, but I agree with you. Yeah, like we do need to have free will. Or how about this? Challenge if there's unlimited free will. Find something, say, okay, we can agree that free will should happen. Do you think someone should freely be able to shoot anyone that walks in their house, no matter if that person's trying to rob them or not? They're not on that person's property. Should I be able to kill them no matter what? No? Okay. That's a location-based right to kill, just like in utero is a location-based right to kill. You're trying to find things that they are basically saying but don't realize what it's called is taking things to the furthest logical conclusion. So excellent. So are there any questions you might ask them from our list of questions? What things might you do in order to get a more clear idea of why they're arguing for that position?
We'd probably ask them if they disagreed with it's an individual person or if it's a life. I'd probably ask them, I'd be like, well, how would you define life? Does it exist? Can it exist on its own? And I'd be like, well, there's people who are hooked up to hospital beds. Kill them. Does it have a heartbeat? Well, what about people with pacemakers? Artificial things.
Yeah.
I'd ask how they define life.
If people are pronounced dead at the end of a heartbeat, why shouldn't we pronounce people alive at the start of a heartbeat? That makes sense to me. And a lot of times you can make it kind of like a, this is what I was thinking, and not a, where I'm telling you all the things, but it's inviting them in that journey of logic. Self-deprecating humor is a wonderful way to go about it also as well. Making fun of yourself. Anything where you're trying to, who here is familiar with what's called fight or flight? You're trying to get people out of fight or flight a lot of times, because when you're in fight or flight, you cannot see nuance. And a great way to get people out of fight or flight is making them feel safe in some way, or sometimes using humor. You cannot stay in fight or flight if, number one, you're thinking rationally, or number two, you're laughing. If you see, has anyone here been trained as like a first responder or anything? One of the things they ask people to do as a first responder, you first come up, you're asking a person, What is your name? What is your address? Who's president right now? What did you eat for breakfast? Stuff like that. It's not because they're like, I wonder what they're going to puke up on me later. That's not why they're asking. They're asking because they're trying to get you thinking, because fight or flight happens in the amygdala, the emotional center. Rational thinking happens in the prefrontal cortex. They can't both be on at the same time. And the amygdala will, by default, override the prefrontal cortex unless you start activating that prefrontal cortex. Asking them factual questions that aren't going to trigger them, and using humor. In fact, I wrote a paper in college about, it was some Nicolas Cage movie where he gets abducted by all these terrorists, and at one point he's got all these guys with guns around him, and he starts telling "Yo mama so fat" jokes. And these guys all with guns start giggling and then laughing, then they all drop their weapons and are like, tell us another one, because humor is disarming. And especially self-deprecating humor, though I don't recommend it for the abortion conversation. Anyway, can we say they did a good job on that? Okay, we can do one more. Who feels strongly about theirs? Yes, brave soul.
We also did abortion.
Okay, so let's see.
So we took the position of against abortion and the other person's pro-abortion.
Okay.
So the two affirmations is similar to what they said. The life of the mom, we agree with them.
Yeah.
The life of the mom should be considered.
Yeah.
And then second of all, a lot of them mention well, what if it's a child? What if the mom was raped?
Yeah.
And it's a child. So.
Yeah.
The questions we would ask were kind of why would we, if the mom was raped and the child, they want to get rid of the child, why would we bring evil to something that's already evil?
Yeah. How do two wrongs make a right here? Is an abortion, will that ever make you forget about a rape? No. Will it never make the trauma of that rape go away? So we understand, but how is punishing, so the one innocent party is already being punished and will continue to be punished. That's the mom. There's a second innocent party, and that's the baby. Why are we punishing the innocent party for the sins of someone else? Or how do you decide which life is worthwhile? What has moral worth? How does the way someone came into the world dictate their moral worth as worthy of dying? So good. And any other?
And then the questions we would ask them then would be, do you genuinely think abortion is the only solution to this problem?
Excellent.
Or is there other solutions, what can we do to reduce rape? What can we do to improve the life of the mom? Is she drinking with the child? Is she smoking with the child? Is she taking drugs with the child? All of these things could have a negative impact on her and her child. And if we focus more on getting her healthy so that she can have a healthy child and she can be healthy, then that you don't need abortion.
Well, I'm also going to bring it back to, are there other options? Which sometimes just the unknown is so scary, but if you okay, let's talk about the unknown. Let's say that you do take this child to term and give it up for adoption. That's 9 months that you're going to have to get, that you're going to have to be sacrificing. And again, this will also depend on whether or not the person is a Christian or not. In fact, there was a girl that I was having a conversation with that she said her biggest fear was, what if she got raped? And she had to make that decision. And basically, I didn't go into any of the pro-life apologetics stuff. I just asked her, are you willing to take up your cross for Christ? And she's like, yeah. I was like, does it matter which cross it is? And she's like, no. I said, this is a cross that we women might have to take up. There's no man in this room that will ever have to carry that cross. But we decide now, do I take up this cross and follow Christ? And if that means I have to give up 9 months of my life, well, that is a cross I'm willing to take up. And she kind of looked like this, and she sat up a little straighter. She goes, okay. She hadn't thought through it in those terms before. This is a decision she had already made. We're probably going way over time. I wish we could do more. Thank y'all for playing the game with me. So.